Yeah. So welcome everybody.
Yeah, it's good to have everybody here with us, and just wanted to welcome everybody to AdamFest7 in our second year of virtual format. Hopefully, maybe final year of virtual format.
God, I hope so.
With the world hopefully returning to its normal spinning progress. I just wanted to again thank everybody for checking out the Bill Adam Facebook group and checking in, and all of the events for the next 3 days are listed there. I've tried to make it as easy as possible for you to locate where to be and when to be. Events will kind of kick off 3 each day, along with some open teaching sessions offered by Carl Sievers, Greg Wing, and Bob Slack. So we're really happy for you guys to join us. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Mike real quick to talk about some of the cool offerings we've had this year regarding merchandising.
Yeah. So we've made a few posts, and our main goal here is not to sell you stuff. So don't take us the wrong way, but these are some useful little things that allow us to continue to fund the festival and the scholarship fund. And so if you take a look, if you just scroll down on the Facebook page, you will see information about a custom mouthpiece pouch that we had made. And if you are of age and are inclined to drink a distilled beverage, we have some Glencairn whiskey glasses that we're still in the process of getting customized, and we will ship those when we get them. So if you sent us money for one of those, I've got record of it. We'll ship it when we get them, but we don't have those yet. So just FYI. But yeah.
And they are sharp.
Yeah, they're really
it's very nice stuff. Very cool.
Yeah. That's all I have on the merch. So don't want to make too big a deal about it, but it's good stuff. It's quality stuff. So I'll turn it over to Carl.
Okay, so audio and video levels coming across okay?
Yeah.
All right. So a couple things to say as we get rolling here. First of all, we're very, very grateful for Rob and Mike Mann for doing all the work this year. Incredible tons of minutia to deal with, and organizing and logistics and technology and double checking each other and offering something to get it edited back with, it can get maddening. So these guys have done a great job, and our future could not be in better hands. I'm so very pleased. And that also goes for the Altus Trumpet Ensemble. Really good stuff. So we're going to do some hopefully very interactive things, some questions and answers, and get some discussion going. But I wanted to make some preliminary remarks and sort of lay the groundwork. I've got Greg Wing listening in here as well. If you know us at all, Greg and I have been friends since we were children. Actually, both grew up in Kentucky and known each other forever. And I mention that because of all the shared experiences, and we tend to check each other. Greg will do what Greg does. I'll do what I do, and our other friends, and then our own students who are their own fabulous players and teachers in their own right. So, Greg is going to be listening, and he can get me on track or fill in the gaps as needed. But one of the things that I really want to make sure of as we go forward carrying Mr. Adams' legacy is what we choose to emphasize from his teaching. And of course, all of our experiences are unique to our experiences. What he might have shared with Greg or Jim O'Banion or Charlie Davis or Rich Fanning or anybody else might be a little bit different. But the temptation often is, in recognizing we've got a very, very large constituency of thousands, literally thousands of people from all over the world who are curious about what it is we do. And sometimes we hear from people that don't play very well or are very passionate about their playing, but are really frustrated. And coming to us for help is exactly appropriate. And those are things we want to have happen, and we want to be able to help. But that sort of points to the dilemma of what to emphasize. Things that are a little cause us to be wary a little bit would be that by doing the so-called famous Bill Adam routine, you're going to morph into becoming a great player. If you know us at all, you're going to hear a lot about the work ethic that a lot of us have adopted and lived, and we learned from Mr. Adam, and all of that is true. But what we want to do is give you tangible guidelines you can take into your own experience in the practice room and in the performance arena so that you can become a better player, enjoy the freedom of having whatever's in your imagination actually come out the trumpet. And I think students I've had before, and one in particular, I won't give his name away, he's probably listening, but he said to me when he was about 18 years old, I think I've got a great trumpet player inside of me. I just can't get it out the horn. And, and that probably speaks for a lot of us. So my points of emphasis are as follows. This is my take on what I think we should be doing with this heritage we've got going forward. Mr. Adam reminded us absolutely constantly that playing the trumpet is an aural art. So the context for that is we have 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, sight, and hearing. And Mr. Adams said, keep your mind in the sound. And we have heard that and heard that and heard that. So I mention that because people say, yeah, okay, I've heard that before, but what about my chops? What about my corners? What about my air? What about fill in the blank? And as soon as they go down that road, they are no longer in the aural. We heard this constantly from Mr. Adam, and I'm going to suggest to everyone that we have to be in the aural 100% of the time, not just when it's convenient. The science behind that is what Mr. Adam referred to as kinesthetic response. And essentially, that means that what that means literally is that that's a physical action that's the result of a thought. So recognizing the truth of that, we have to stay in the aural the very, very, very best we can. And when I say the best we can, that means with no baggage, no excuses, no rationales, no, you don't understand, my chops are swollen, or you don't understand, I can't do that, or I got something wrong with me, or I need a new mouthpiece, or this, whatever that may be. You have got to go to the aural and stay there so that the mind has the information it needs to tell the body what to do. That morphs into the notion of causes and results. And what we mean by that, and all the old guard Adam students heard that many, many times, the result we get is that beautiful, very vividly defined, opulent, resonant sound. Keep your mind in the sound. Keep your mind in the sound, capital T-H-E, italicized T-H-E, an ideal sound. And we get that from listening to great players like Greg and Charlie and Maurice Andre and Doc Severinsen and Adolf Herseth. You get a model for the sound. You keep your mind in the sound. That is the result. But by keeping your focus on the result, that causes the causes. And so, not to sound like double talk, but all of the mechanics of playing the trumpet are brought into order and brought into reality by that notion of kinesthetic response. And the only efficient, organized, proper way to balance all those myriad factors is by allowing the part of the brain that controls kinesthetic responses the freedom to do its job. Then our conscious mind's job is simply focus on the sound. So that notion of causes and results. So if you're listening to this and thinking, yeah, but what about the routine? Or yeah, but what about this and that and the other? All of those things are servile to that fundamental notion of keep your mind in the sound. If we focus on the mechanics, the result will never be its best. And then that's what's happening with players that are experiencing frustration. Everybody experiences frustration. There's never been a perfect trumpet player, and there's never going to be a perfect trumpet player. But people that are chronically having a rough time, frustrated, can't do what others can do or what their imagination is conceiving, you can bet that their focus is in one of the 5 senses that's not the aural. So the challenge is listen to all of these presentations over the next couple of days and really lock into what's being shared. Be ready with questions. All sincere questions are absolutely welcome. This is best for us if it is interactive. You'll hear stuff that maybe you've heard before. And should that happen and you feel that that's not sufficient, ask that presenter, hey man, I still don't get it, or or I tried that and it didn't work or whatever. We'll flesh that out for you. So examples of questions that I'm going to ask myself that I'd like, we'll address later. A lot of our folks are very, very prominent players in what you might call the commercial end of the industry. So does that imply that what we learned from Bill Adam was only good for commercial players? Interesting. You may perceive, if you're from a different school of thought, as you observe what we do, that a lot of Adam students play louder than I do. Is that true? Is that significant? What does that really mean? Is what we do all about developing iron chops, high notes, a great deal of power, the legendary endurance? Is that what it's all about? So again, go to all the sessions, interact. There'll be chances for questions and answers throughout. You have already been told that Greg and Bob and myself will be offering open lessons, and there was some question on the Facebook page. It's exactly what it says. So there will be a mass Zoom invitation for those three things. Everybody's welcome to attend. If you got a question, you got a problem, you got a frustration, you want to have Greg work with you or Bob work with you, or I can work with you, and then everybody can observe, because so very often we learn well from observing others. Maybe somebody has a question that's the same question you would have asked, and you can see how that goes and see what we would do with that. And then finally, before I turn this back to Rob and Mike, Bob Slack, Charlie Davis, and I are going to, our little thing is going to be entitled The Myth of Playing Without Effort, which is tomorrow at 1 o'clock Central Time. And we will directly, bluntly, candidly address a lot of the notions that we encounter so very often from people that just want what we got, but are a little afraid to go there, or aren't so sure it's for them, or whatnot. So we hope to make that very tangible and very rewarding to listen to. So that's it for me. Thanks, guys. Rob and Mike.
Okay, so thank you. Thanks for that intro. So I think, the title of this opening session is Who Was William Adam? And a lot of us know varying degrees to that answer, or different. We've all, like you said, Carl, we all have our own individual experiences. But for the sake of the new people and for the people that have been around the block, we want to ask some of these questions. Some of them are going to be very simple and straightforward and probably short answers. And some of them, some of the questions I hope sort of spur some conversation. So I would say, Carl or Greg, I hope you both answer these, or feel free to answer whichever ones you want. Or if I ask a bad question, tell me and I'll move on to another one. So just in a few sentences, because a lot of this we're going to expand upon all week, but for the new people watching, just in 2 or 3 sentences, who was Bill Adam? Or if it's easier to answer just to you, who was Bill Adam to you? What's the short answer version? Because we're going to expand upon that here in a minute.
Greg, go.
Well, the short answer is he was my trumpet teacher at Indiana University. That's pretty short and sweet.
Very good.
In other words, a lot of us, I knew Mr. Adam as the trumpet teacher. And then obviously through his legacy, we're getting to know more about the man. But for me in Indiana, and ever since I studied with him, I never knew anything about his family until obviously you go to Indiana and Bloomington, you get to know Mrs. Adam and his family a little bit. But for me, I always left the personal to him, and he was my trumpet teacher. And whatever he said, boy, that was good enough for me.
Carl, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, of course, ditto what Greg said, but I got there a little before Greg did, just because I got there before Greg did. No big reason there, but the thing with Mr. Adam that was, well, a lot of things were unique, but you had this sense of connection that was just really something, and something unusual. We all had professors. IU was loaded with famous names and this and that and the other, but there was something about once you were embraced into Mr. Adams' studio, there was a community and a bond, community with your brothers and sisters in the studio, but a bond with that teacher that it was personal, serious, intense. Uh, it's been said so many times, but again, for those that may not know us that well yet, the sense that when Mr. Adam embraced you into that studio, he had 100% conviction in your success, and his passionate, undiluted belief in that changed you. And all the doubts and fears and angst and competition and intensity and everything that goes along with going to a major school of music, you had this almost kind of a life raft of reinforcement through this powerful guy. He had this powerful personality and a passion for what he did, and he'd look at you in the eye with absolute belief that you were gonna be successful in life and on the trumpet.
Great. That kind of, so I'm going to let that sort of lead into my next question, because I just have a bunch of questions written down in no particular order. And you kind of answered, maybe you can expand upon this a little bit, but describe the environment, the trumpet studio environment he fostered at IU. You sort of talked about that, but do you have any more to add to that, or?
Sure. Tons. Looking at Greg, it was intense, competitive. Mr. Adam was always after us to treat each other right. Be a good guy, be nice. He would say, you never put out anybody else's light to make yours shine brighter. Meanwhile, Greg and Bob and I are in the back row competing with each other like crazy. But there, as I was telling you guys before we got online, 50 years later, these are my dearest friends on planet Earth. And I thank God for the intensity and the pressure, the refiner's fire that was so necessary for all of our collective success. I mean, there's tons to say about the studio. It was like kind of like a fraternity in that we were just, there's a loyalty and a passion, and we fed off each other. And if you'd be in a practice room at 7 o'clock in the morning with your tall cup of coffee and ready to go, and if somebody was 10 minutes late, you'd let them have it. And it was sarcastic and intense and competitive, and we'd play duets. And if Greg played 8 hours a day, I was going to play 8.5 hours a day, or whatever it was. But that was all great. Greg, you go.
No, I mean, everything that you said, Carl, was right on. The bond is what sticks to my mind more than anything. We were there for one reason and one reason only, to be the best people we could be through the trumpet. And Mr. Adam had this uncanny ability to make you feel like you were the most important person on the planet. And so you worked really hard. And as a result of working hard, you got to know more about his philosophies of life. And boy, like I said, fast forward 40 or 50 years, and there isn't a day that goes by that we don't think about what this man has taught us. And since we're teaching now, there's not a day that goes by that we don't instill his beliefs through us to our students to be able to emulate what we do to carry forward the service that Mr. Adam graciously provided all of us. It was a wonderful time.
Great. That leads that I think that's amazing. It kind of leads me into another question that's somewhat related. And again, some of these questions, a lot of people are going to know the answers to some, but I want all the new people and everybody to be reminded, or if you don't know, you're going to find out. But either for Greg or Carl, how selective was Mr. Adam at accepting students of any level, good, bad, terrible, don't know which end to blow in, et cetera? Like how did he approach that?
Well, to me, that's an absolutely vitally giant, central, pivotal question. So part of the answer is when we talk about going to IU and what I would consider Indiana University's golden years, and I'm imagining people that are at IU now hearing that statement, maybe not too thrilled about that. And I don't mean anything by that or any barbs in that, but I think when you looked at the roster around that building, the time right before I was there, when Jerry and Charlie and Larry and those guys were there, right up through when I got there, and then Greg and Bob and some others joined us in graduate school. Everybody on that faculty was either from the Metropolitan Opera or the Cleveland Symphony or the Chicago Symphony or the New York Philharmonic or the Philadelphia Orchestra. It was nuts. This roster, you'd walk down the hall and read those names, and oh my gosh. So, along with that, there was a tendency for some of these. I'm trying to be graceful here about what I might call trophy hunters, teachers that would only take the people that were coming out of high school that had all the privileges of fancy training, fancy summer camps, owned all the instruments, private lessons, youth orchestra, people with just a ton of background and perceived advantages at that point. And were those people in Mr. Adam's studio? Yes, they were. However, Mr. Adam never turned anybody away who had a genuine and passionate desire to improve themselves. And he would talk to somebody, look them in the eye, and if he sensed that that person was a believer in the work ethic and the commitment and was willing to do what it took to get there, one of his prime things, which he told me in plain English, because I asked him about it when I was 19, 20 years old, that it wasn't up to him to determine somebody else's future or to say somebody could not. He was a believer in human potential. And if somebody that had a crappy trumpet and never had lessons and didn't know how to transpose and all that stuff came to Mr. Adam, but he saw in their eyes a genuine passion to get it. He was going to find room for them. So his studio varied a lot. But when you look at that, if you could graph that long term, maybe some people got there pretty quick, maybe some people took longer than others. But by and large, the whole crew over time became very, very good trumpet players and very successful at whatever it was they were going to pursue in life.
Greg, you have anything you want to add?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. This sort of leads me into another thinking about, how Mr. Adam taught. I mean, and I could ask you, I kind of have a question you already answered. And I said, what was his approach to teaching or playing? And you kind of went over that in a nutshell at the start. So I want to ask you another.
Well, we can embellish that, Mike, real quick,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's important for people that, again, that may not know. And I'm thinking if Charlie's listening, of course, there's nothing new here for people that are true experts. But Mr. Adam modeled nearly everything. It was pretty unusual that you'd play something in a lesson where he wouldn't play it first. Now, if you had a recital that was about ready to go, or an orchestral audition that was in a couple days or whatnot, that might be a time where he'd sit back and listen and critique. But the whole modeling thing, as far as triggering the right thoughts with that whole mind in the sound deal, was the practical application. And part of what I was trying to say in my opening remarks is the difference between really pretty philosophies versus making it real. And Mr. Adam made it real by modeling. And a thing I also remember vividly is I try to teach things to my own students and have my really old Schlossberg book that has some of his scribbles in it. When I finally got into Mr. Adam's studio, we jumped in on this stuff and he did not write down any of it. He expected me to hear it and get it and know it right now, like one time. And did I succeed at that? And the answer is no. But because of this group experience, I could leave his office kind of not admitting that I wasn't sure I got it or remembered it all, but I'd hear all these other folks doing it in the old third floor. Everybody's heard about the third floor. The whole hallways lined with Adam students practicing the stuff he had given me. So I had all this kind of unofficial mentorship up and down the hall. But he did that, in my opinion, because he didn't want me relying on a printed page as much as he wanted me to turn my ears on so strongly that that was the overwhelmingly dominant sense. He challenged me to listen so intently that I got it the first time, and in so doing, tapped into his model, which included how he breathed, the color of his tone, the intensity, the sustain, the follow through, the connectivity, between the notes that we call follow through, all those subtle aspects were very purposefully delivered.
I have a question for that, just to sort of follow up on that point real quick. When I remember when I was a younger guy and I was in a lesson with Jim Reed, who I studied with in high school, you know, he would ask a question back to me, like when we were trading off, and he'd be like, he'd play a Clark study, I'd play it back, and then he'd ask me a question and say something like, hey, how many times, something very simple, like, how many times did I play that through? And I'd be like, oh, I don't know. And what he was checking for is like, I mean, he was very explicit to say, like, you do it exactly like I do it, you know, and because he was challenging me. Do you or Greg have ways that you challenge your students to go after that engagement with their ears when they're studying as much as they do, just so that they get out of themselves just trying to get it right, just to try to play?
Greg.
Well, I can recall several times, and I hope this is relevant. I can recall several times in lessons where a student will come in and they're not really listening to what I'm doing. You know, they'll play it the way they think they should play it. And I've often having to remind them, and I stop them and I'll say, you know, there's a reason why I'm playing. And I want you to pick up on what I'm doing. You're not doing what I want you to do. And that usually gets their attention enough. Now, whether it's stellar or it varies on any given day, as you know. But I want my students to pick up on the oralness and get themselves out of themselves. Some of them come in and they think they're pretty good. And when I sense that, we go at it pretty heavy so that they leave with their tails between their legs at the end of an hour. And then I have other students that come in and think that they're better than me. And I usher them to the door and say, have a great week. Let's try it again next week. And so we have a lot of students that come in, and, you know, I've been at it for 20 years now, and I've seen 300 or 400 students come through my office, and it's a blessing. It's a wonderful avenue. I have a picture of Mr. Adam right on my wall that I look at least 500 times a day. And I imagine my sound as if he were sitting in that room with me playing. And so that's what we're trying to get across to our students, is the presence of mind, the peace of the mind, the confidence to play with an assertiveness that commands, well, respect is probably the right word, but there's an assertiveness to what we do to command the inner self, so that you feel like you're getting something out of this. And you guys know this as well as anybody. When you have a good day on trumpet, you feel pretty daggone good about yourself, don't you? And so I guess we can tie it all into what Mr. Adam taught us so vividly, as Carl eloquently speak. I think I need to just be quiet and listen to Carl.
Okay, so let me be eloquent here. You know, with Mr. Adam, there was no fooling around, for one thing. So, and you know, I'm trying to. I hope this stuff makes sense. We're trying to describe somebody whom we knew intimately, and then describing that to people that never met him, of course, is a little tough. So on the third floor where we all practiced, there were these oak doors that are about 4 inches thick and had no window. They're, you know, the building, I don't know when that thing was built, but it was all limestone and oak and, you know, and et cetera. So there was sort of an unwritten rule. Yeah. There's like an unwritten rule. You never open somebody's door when they were practicing, or you get your head torn off, because there's no window and you might whack somebody in the bell with your door or whatever. So we'd be in there practicing, and maybe it's Greg and myself in there practicing and being as diligent as we knew how and dead serious and all that. That door would come slamming open. He'd say, "What the hell is going on in here?" And we'd think, "What? You know, I'm in here doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm practicing and doing it." And he would have heard something he didn't like, and he would just let you have it. Okay. So I know Greg very well, and Greg's probably a little more polished than I am. But that intensity that we got from Mr. Adam in my studio, and of course, Mike and Rob both studied with me. And number one, they know their future and their well-being is my number one priority. They know very, very well that I very, very much care about them as people. and their futures, and they know that. And I don't want to get too gooey here, but in all of that, man, we are blunt because I'm a believer in potential, and I'm a believer in the music business and the future, that there are opportunities. But it's like, okay, here's what I got to do to get there. And you come into the studio, and same with Mr. Adam, it's like a deal. I'm making a deal with you that we're going to be a team, and together we're going to work on you so that you can reach your goals and be successful. So in that sense, and Mike started and Rob talking about working with Jim Reed, and were you really paying attention enough to know how many times I played that, much less all the detail in the delivery and the timbre and the sustain and the follow through and the breathing and the whole package. Were you really paying attention or not? And in my suit, it's like, hey man, I wouldn't give 10 cents to hear the bleep coming out of your trumpet. We better
Yeah.
zero in on this thing and get busy here. So yeah, we got our ways.
There's something that I want to share about our illness. Sometimes we get locked into doing these exercises day in and day out, that sometimes I'll just play it in a different key to see if the student is paying attention. And then they start on, they don't have a clue what note I started on. And then I ask them, well, what are you listening to? Were you trying to read the notes on the page, or you listen to the sound? He said, well, what sound did you play? And I said, what sound did I play? And I try to have them sing it back. It kind of gets your attention, and they know that our intentions are sincere in helping them achieve their goals. As I always say, it's a lifelong journey. It's one day at a time. But Mr. Adam had this uncanny ability to make sure that you give yourself a checkup from the neck up, as I say, every single day, and you better fire it up.
Great. So sort of spinning out of that, that line of thought, I've got a question here that I think would be really good for everybody to hear an answer to. Did Mr. Adam teach all of his students the same way, or did he vary his approach and make it individual for people depending on what they needed?
Well, again, all of these questions, a few have heard before, but most have not heard before. So this is maybe a little tricky. Again, I think about my buddies that I have so much regard for, maybe going, what's he saying? He's full of crap. That's not, anyway, but who knows? I think that, yeah, I know for a fact, an absolute fact, that he tailored things to the individual. I can give examples. For example, did he ever play the mouthpiece? There are people out there that think Mr. Adam was anti-buzzing or anti-using the mouthpiece. That is absolutely not true. And I've got MP3s on my computer of a good friend of mine who recorded his lessons where they did a lot of work on the mouthpiece. Now, he did not do that with me at all. Yeah, so there are any number of examples, including equipment modifications, which maybe somebody wants to ask about that later. There was a period of time there where several of us played Bach 1C mouthpieces with an 18 throat in them. And he had his reasons for that. I see Mike Mann's eyes rolling there because, so yeah, whether it was the materials you played, how you played them, Maggio exercises, any number of examples of things he would ask an individual to do different variations of the so-called routine. But I would also say that underlying or overarching concepts tended to be in common for all of us. He'd say, take a big breath and blow, and make sure you keep your mind in that sound. And as Greg keeps talking about, you needed to really, really, really key in on his sound. And that was certainly common to all of us. And that's back to the kinesthetic response deal. And stories we've all heard before. We would listen outside his door during lessons because, you'd be taking a break and there was this hunger to learn everything you could possibly get from this fabulous teacher. If you were embraced into that fraternity, so to speak, you just wanted every iota you could get, so you'd listen outside the door. And he'd be in that little studio with the 4-inch thick oak doors playing with somebody who played really well. And you'd hear this kind of muted sound coming through the door. Then you'd hear the sound that went through the door, down the hall, and around the corner. And that was Mr. Adam. And was it loud? And the answer to that is I studied with Mr. Adam continuously for 8 years at IU. And then years later, so I had a lot of lessons with Mr. Adam. Did I ever hear him play loud? And the answer is never once. But he had a thing in his sound that made you want to stick your fingers in your ear. It was this resonant intensity. It's kind of hard to describe. Um, so, uh, did he teach everybody the same? In that sense, oh yeah, copy that sound, and that's gonna trigger things. Then of course there are people that already, I looked back at Bob Baca, who could multiple tongue and had fingers like crazy, and maybe he didn't need to spend a ton of lesson time on that stuff. Or Alan Johnson, who shows up with a really locked in double C. And, so people's needs were different as well.
Could I add something to that, Carl, just to sort of set up how the weekend goes? I think we talked about this last year when we did sort of a misconceptions of Mr. Adam, talk, and that a lot of people want to go to trumpet playing and start talking about things like mouthpiece buzzing, lead pipe buzzing, long tones, not to do long tones, and all these things. And they try to make a way of who a teacher or who a trumpet school of thought is, and they try to make it about those things. And I've caught myself, trying to do that as well. Like, oh, Mr. Adam didn't do much mouthpiece buzzing. And then you'll hear what other people say. Yeah, he did. He did that with this person or this person. And then you realize we run the risk of putting somebody who is incredibly dynamic and knowledgeable in how they went about teaching the trumpet, and you try to put him in a box, and it's like, that's like that. There's a danger to that, and that what was uncompromising is exactly what you described of, it's like the methods at which he got someone to unlock their trumpet playing in their mind, to embrace, all of the things that are really matter when you're playing the trumpet, what's going on between your ears, and that those other things are just tools, that don't define his way of teaching,
Yes. So what I'm about, I've said before to my students at OU that this is important, as if my own opinion is important, but I think this part is two things. These are reasons why it's really important for people that are listening in today to hear you guys play, because there's credibility in being able to do it. Okay. The way you folks sound, and listening to Bob Slack, some of the stuff we've uploaded, and Greg, and these guys, you can look on YouTube, they're all over the place. Charlie, Larry Hall, any number of players. But anyway, there's credibility when you hear the fabulous tones and the control and the intonation and the finesse and the complete capability of you folks when you play. That's credibility. You've been in the arena, and you can do it, and you can do it really, really well, and do it really well for a long time. The other thing I would offer, and this is what I think is important pedagogically, and I'm looking at Rob and Mike as experts in their own right, and I remember hearing them both play as younger persons when they weren't that good yet, and now they are. And now you have the benefit of hindsight. So here's the significance of that to me. You both become veteran teachers. You're badass trumpet players. I mean, you guys are both tens as trumpet players, and so is Dave Amlong and Ben Hay and the other guys in your group. So now you can look back on hindsight and say, what about this? What about that? And test the waters and check this, and maybe this or that's useful, or I saw something and whatever. But what you're going to find out and here's the punchline, that as you explore all those things and these circuitous paths come all the way back to bullseye, is still you get that sound in your head and let that take control. And that's the overarching dominant thing that controls the process. So it's okay to be curious and ask. And there are any number of things, and again, not to wear it out, but Greg and Bob and I talk every day, either online or on the phone or both. And there are things that these guys do, like, what? And Charlie Davis, that he'll say, well, he'll mention something, I'm thinking, now what in the world, I have never heard that before. Or and after all my years and experience and maybe some decent accomplishments now and again, there are things that emerge in Greg's experience, for example, or Bob or Charlie or Bobby Burns, or people I really rely on, Jim Reed, that that I didn't know, hadn't heard, help fill in the gaps in my own playing, help me get from where I am to the next, maybe, playing certain things a little better. So there's a place for that for sure. But as long as I keep that beautiful sound in my bullseye, I'm good.
I'm going to expand on this just a little bit. I'm thinking how fortunate I have been to have people around me who like me and want to help me. And as Carl was talking, we go way back, and Carl and Bob, there isn't a day that goes by that one of them shares something that helps me. I'm going through a few issues with the middle finger and embouchure being torn upside down and putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. For those of you who know, you know what's going on. And for those of you who don't, it's kind of private, so I'm just going to keep it there. I always say I'm not going to give in, just keep at it. And so here I am in French Lick, Indiana. I'm going to play a 4-hour Dixieland gig today, and it's going to work pretty good, even without a middle finger. So you can figure that out. But there isn't a day that goes by that it's important that, Mr. Adam would always have us, tell us that you can never have too many friends in this business. And so he was all passionate about making sure that we had our own priorities in line about being good people. There's a direct correlation between the type of person you are and when comes out the end of your bell. And boy, sometimes it takes longer than others to figure that out. But one thing that I figured out is that once I feel comfortable with me, it's amazing what that does to the whole psychic and the genre of calming your mind so that you can focus on the most beautiful sound that you can play with and allow what's going to happen to you as the byproduct, so that we don't get our results and causes conflicted. Personal relationships is so very important. If I feel that's one thing that I try to hammer home more than any is that, man, you need a lot of friends in this business, because there's going to be a day when you're down and you need somebody to help lift you up. And so I take that away as being one of the most influential aspects of Mr. Adams' teaching that I didn't get with a lot of other teachers. It's quite unique.
Great. Rob, anything else on that one you want to throw in?
No, I just love what Greg said about that. Even everything, what comes out of the bell is a mirror for the mind. And a lot of times we think of that as just being the music and the pitch and the rhythm and all that stuff. But that's a beautiful analogy that it's like really everything, insecurity, confidence, even the ugly ego stuff, that stuff all mirrors out the bell. It's pretty cool.
And sometimes you have to be on the planet just a few more decades to figure it all out. Yeah.
Cool. This is sort of a follow-up to some of the stuff we've been talking about. You've talked about the way he taught things, or, he would maybe do some things with some students and not the other, or vice versa, or change it later, or whatever they needed, tailored his teaching to them. But there's all this talk, and of course, a lot of us know about the subject I'm about to ask you about, and that's the routine. How did Mr. Adam teach the routine? And you've touched on it a little bit. And was it always the same? And by that, I mean, in the 60s, was it the same as it was in the 70s or in the 80s? Or was it the same? Another way to think about that, was it the same for Greg as it was for Carl, as it was for Gil Hoffer, or anybody? I mean, that's what I mean. And also a follow-up to that is, did he write it down? So it's kind of a three-parter, if you want to maybe tackle that one part at a time.
Well, Mr. Adam never wrote anything down. The only thing he ever wrote down that I'm aware of is that expanding scales that he gave to some high school student one time. And, or he probably wrote it down for a lot of different of his students. I just remember that. He never taught anything. I believe Mr. Adam was a master at understanding that you have to be fundamentally sound. And he says, what can I do to get the kids' minds squared away so that they can rely on the physical to come around without thinking about the physical? You know, his teaching was so unique. It is not like most of the teachers in the world today who are all analytical, and they'll tell you what you're doing wrong, and then they'll help you to try to give you exercises to help you fix what they think is wrong. But then the student's mind is all wrapped up in the analytics of what the teacher just told you, that they never become mentally free to allow the physical to come around. Now that's a mouthful. So he never wrote anything down, you know, and I remember, I'm fast forwarding now, I studied with him from 1973 to 1981. And of course, you know, you're always a student of your teacher. But I remember asking Mr. Adam, a couple of decades later when I began teaching, I says, "What, Mr. Adam, how come you stopped doing long tones and you started doing glance? And why did you stop doing glance and started doing theek?" He says, "Well, young fella, if you've done these things as many times as I have, you get tired of doing them. You got to do something else." And he told me that point blank. And so I think Mr. Adam, what he's based on that, he changes the routine because he's tired of doing the exercises. So I tell my students this all the time, you know, it's not really the exercises. If the breath is moving and the mind's in the sound, the physical is going to do what it needs to do without you getting in the way. So it's not the exercise, but it's how you do the exercise to allow the freedom of the breath and the fireness and the extension of the breath and the follow through. You get it. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but
Well, we need that. We all need that. That's okay.
Let me add a couple things.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of John Head, by the way. He was principal in Atlanta for very many years. Great guy, funny guy, and a hell of a trumpet player. When he was at Indiana University in the 50s, there was no routine. Okay, so there's that. Also, Mr. Adam was a practical guy. He wrote down the expanding scale because he made it up. The rest of it was in the Schlossberg and the Clark book, and he'd point to it or expect you to go find it or whatever.
Yeah,
And,
we started writing this down for our own convenience so that we didn't have to get all the books out.
People don't realize is Xerox machines were new when we were growing up. You know, that was whoa, really? You can get something copied without having to do it with a stone and a hammer and, you know, like on the Flintstones. So, you know, when Bob Slack was in Las Vegas, he paid a professional copyist, typesetter, calligrapher person to write out the routine he did. And that got copied a million times and on the internet shows up, and that became pervasive. But I would also suggest to people that are joining the party late that the earlier versions of the routine had more flexibility in them than some of the later versions. And that's a little bit of a personal axe to grind for me. My own playing got better in lots of ways when I reintroduced flexibility work, real flexibility work. And I owe a lot of that to Charlie Davis, to tell you the truth, who I got with quite a few years ago. And out of the blue, he pulls out the Charles Colin book, which I had done in high school, but put away once I got to college. And once I revisited, you know, real flexibilities, and there are any number of resources, a lot of good things happen. So yeah, the routine, and exactly as Greg said, if you keep the energized breath free and cooking and the sounds gorgeous, just play a lot. But I would also interject that one of the things that Mr. Adam used in his teaching, which was sort of part of the routine in that it was part of how he presented it, was, and Greg knows very well, every lesson had humor in it. You'd go in there and he'd tell you a joke. He'd screw up the joke more often than not, make fun of your haircut, tell you you're getting fat. You know, you name it, right? Greg, furniture disease, and you know, and all these little jokes he had, and all, you know, the whole thing of getting you out of yourself, breaking the ice, you know, which made what I call fertile ground for what was coming next, which was, you know, through the routine, he would get your fundamentals lined up. So
Great. So kind of taking a cue from that discussion, I'm trying to think the best way to word this. What, if any, what aspects of Mr. Adams' teaching Yeah, I like that. What aspects of Mr. Adams' teaching that were innovative and unique, say in the 60s or earlier on in his teaching career, at that time, again, maybe more unique to him and different and innovative, that are now considered more mainstream, that have taken off? Can you
Well,
key on
to
any
me,
of those?
there's a little bit of an irony there. I think what Adam was doing differently that might have been considered innovative was probably actually old, and the pendulum swings. Mr. Parkus was a good friend, and one of the most praised horn professors ever, and rightly so. But in contrast, for example, he would use an embouchure visualizer. And if you're familiar with his book, he would have pictures of embouchures. And the students practice, they'd have a little mirror. I don't know where they got them, but these little 2.5-inch mirrors on their stand. How you looked when you played, trying to get the causes and results business happening by looking a certain way. And and again, I struggle with bringing in other names when we want to focus on Bill Adams. So please, as the weekend progresses, we don't want to get into analyzing other teachers. But clearly, there were very, very well-known pedagogues during those years who were learning a lot about the physiology of the brass. And there was a woman cornet player, Greg, in Kentucky, who was doing fluoroscopic studies of what happens in your mouth. I can't remember her name, but the radiation.
Faye Hansen.
Yeah, the radiation killed her, by the way.
Yeah, she was from Ogden, Utah, and she was very innovative in having X-rays taken of her while she played. And
Yeah.
the radiation did produce cancer, and she passed away from that.
Yeah. So you've got that kind of dichotomy, but then you realize way back when he was a young man and he studied with a guy named Hiram Lammers, and I don't want to screw this up, as I understand it, he was principal trombone in one of the studio orchestras back when they had full-time staff orchestras. And Mr. Adam told me that he was practicing somewhere, and this guy came up to him and said, "Hey, you sound pretty good." And Adam was young, a young professional trumpet player. And some guy he didn't know comes up and said, and if I get the details a little screwed up, the story still holds. Said something like, "You sound pretty good. Why don't you come see me sometime?" And Adam's reaction was, "Hey, who are you? Up yours. I know what I'm doing." But then curiosity gets the better of him, and he finds this guy's studio. And while he's waiting outside, he hears the most beautiful trombone playing he's ever heard in his life. And when the session was over, out walks Tommy Dorsey. Okay. And so when he got with Mr. Lammers, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right. That's where, as far as I understand it, he got into this whole notion of letting the sound be the guide to the process and studying Aikido and Zen and some of those things, which you might consider hip and trendy now. But Mr. Adam had that cooking, in the World War II years, a long time ago. So it's sort of a pendulum. And, I think just to embellish it one step further, I liken expertise as being like a pyramid. And I think this holds true in golf and bass fishing and trumpet playing and you name it. The very top of the very pinnacle of that pyramid, the very, very best players do certain things a certain way. Then there's all the rest who are tying themselves in knots with gizmos and techniques and tricks and doodads and appliances and Lord knows what. And the very best of the best are zeroing in on simple Zen-like cause and results in the proper order thoughts. So that is certainly not new, but begins to emerge as a more dominant, recognized path to success. And I want to be like the people at the top of the pyramid, not the ones chasing their tails everywhere else.
Great. So I want to pause just for a second. We got about 30 minutes left in this session, and I still have several questions, but I mean, we've got 90 something viewers on Facebook. And if you have a question, one of our goals this week is to be as interactive as possible through this streaming medium. And so we want to make sure, if you've got a burning question and, everybody's experiences are different, there might be something I haven't thought of, please type that. I mean, we are looking at the chat in Facebook. Type those questions and we will try to get to as many of those as possible. So, don't be afraid to let us know you've got a question you'd like an answer to. So, all right, let's see here. So, Carl, you kind of started going down this path. And what was that trombone player's name? Not that it's super important, but
yeah. And again, I've written bios on Mr. Adam and forgotten some of the details, so I'm a little paranoid about screwing this up. Hiram, Mr. Adam called him High, like H-Y.
Okay.
And I think it's Lammers, Lammers.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question written down. Who were the early teachers in his life that influenced his playing and teaching? And we sort of started down that road, but I know there are some others.
He grew up in rural Colorado, and he studied with. There was a husband and wife pair that were in the Sousa band that he studied with as a pretty young person. Again, if I screw this up, I'll get the details and we can put it out there, just to be more accurate. I think that was really formative for him, and also studying with Mr. Lammers. I know he interacted later, not lessons, but he was buddies with William Barciano, who was principal in New York, and shared, concepts of what ideal brass playing should sound like. And similarly with Adolf Herzig, they knew each other and were on the same page pedagogically. But I think by then, Mr. Adam had himself pretty well figured out.
Okay, that kind of helps me lead into another question. And it's, this isn't about, I think we would all agree this, this isn't any sort of hero worship or any type of thing I'm asking about, but let's see, where did that go? What players and what models, trumpet sound, life models, what otherwise did Mr. Adam use in his teaching, or did he favor as examples of trumpet playing or ways to do certain things?
So to me, this is one of those where if it was just us in my studio, I would be extremely blunt. So I'm going to be kind of extremely blunt. So I'm going to preface the answer by saying we never, ever, ever disrespect anybody, especially people that are out there in the arena, putting it on the line, taking a chance, stepping forth on stage in a recording studio, whatever. You always respect. But I'm going to say that Adam was really, really unyielding in who he chose as models. And that's because, in my opinion, if he heard a player play a million notes and he would acknowledge, hey, that's really special playing and blah, 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 but it didn't have the sound, he would tend to dismiss that person, because for choosing someone to be a model, they had to have the sound. And if he was just us and you brought in a recording and he heard somebody and you thought, man, this guy's all over it and really great, and it didn't have sound, he'd make that gesture like something didn't smell right, and he would reject that because he wants you to model that very peculiar, sparkly, resonant sound. And so the answer to your question is Adolf Herzig, Doc Severinsen, Maurice Andre. Those were his big three. And he mentioned Horst Eichler, who was principal in Berlin many years ago, back in the era of LPs. Right. Now, part of this answer is it's generational. So there are people listening that may not know who Adolf Herzig was, perish the thought, but we're aware that happens. So with my current students who are so much younger, I'm going to tell them you never, ever, ever disrespect somebody that's out there doing it. Let's say hypothetically they could reach through that stereo system and hand you the trumpet, say, okay, buddy, let's hear you play it. So you never go down that road, but somehow you've got to discern, is that a sound I really, really want as part of my DNA, or is it just a bunch of notes? So, and so the answer to that question could be anybody, but Matthias Hofs, the German player, you're in German brass. Hans Ganch was principal in Vienna. He's retired from there, but still a very active player, great player. You know, people that really have that sparkly. Now, those are classical artists,
Yeah.
and in the commercial realm, that gets tricky too, because you know, over microphones and with studio tweaks and this and that and the other, sometimes, you know, that may be a little different than what you'd hear live. But if you can hear Bob Slack and Greg and Charlie and Bob Burns, Chris Bodie, you know, those are pretty good models too.
Great. I want to spin off of that. Did he ever use non-trumpet models to convey examples of musical examples?
That's back to my axe to grind about being artists and musicians, not routine junkies, because he always, every freaking Monday night, he'd come into masterclass with a stack of LPs. And the point was listen to great artists and learn. So
A
yeah,
lot of vocalists too.
vocalist Pablo Casals, UC Bjorling, Enrico Caruso. Oh, Greg, there was a soprano, a famous Met soprano at IU while we were there, and she made an album called "I Have a Right to Sing the Blues." She could actually swing for an opera singer.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm spacing her name, but yeah, a lot of singers. Judy Garland, he loved Judy Garland singing opera, cello. Yep. And now some people took that info and went in the practice room and played Schlossberg real loud all day. But the really good players, you know, Jerry Hay and any number of people that really, really play well, make sure they're educating their musical minds as much as they possibly can by, you know, listening to the phrasing and the shape and the artistry of these musicians. Sure.
Cool. I want to ask just a few nuts and bolts things before I ask some more thoughtful questions as we sort of wind this session down. Why do we blow or buzz or play the lead pipe? Changing gears.
Well, for one thing, you know, this semantically, and I know Greg wants to answer this too. We have to be careful. We blow the pipe. We don't buzz the pipe. People say, I buzz the pipe. Okay. So you get into a whole, we don't have time to get into the acoustics of it right now, but we maybe should, you know, before the weekend is over. So, well, I think better if Greg takes this question. I've got,
Well,
better hear Greg.
you know, when I came back to Kentucky and I was going to teach college, I had the luxury of going up seeing Mr. Adam 3 or 4 times and taking lessons with him about teaching. And one of the first questions I asked him, Mr. Adam, why in the world do we blow the lead pipe? He goes, to get the air through the tube. That's simple. Get the air through the tube. And I said, well, what? Then I said, you mean get the air through the tube and then whatever's going to happen, happens. He goes, that's right, young fella. You know, we get our mind mixed up in sensory activity and results and causes being flip-flop at the get-go if you start thinking about buzzing the lead pipe. Now, I believe it's a play on terms. The people that say buzz the lead pipe, they're not really buzzing the lead pipe. One of the questions I ask my colleagues and my students verbatim, I says, can you buzz your lips without air going through them? And they say, well, what do you mean? Can you buzz your lips without any air going through them? Or can you buzz your mouthpiece without any air going through them? And they said, well, no. And I said, well, what's more important, the buzz of your lips or the mouthpiece or the breath? How does it all happen? And so I took away from what Mr. Adam taught us about blowing the pipe by equating it to that the breath is going to set things in motion to allow that to work. John Harbaugh has it great in his acoustics of physics that he put out, and he blows across the paper. That's an excellent, for those of you who are not familiar with that, look up The Physics of Brasses by John Harbaugh and study it. It's excellent. But to make a long story short, I guess, Mr. Adams says you want to get the air through the tube. I said, well, how long should you blow the pipe? And he says, until you feel that the air is going through the tube, young fella. And I said, okay, I'm sold. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Kent Smith reminded us it's Eileen Farrell is the opera singer I was trying to think of. Just worth
Kent's
looking up.
on good. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you know, what Greg's talking about, you know, on the blunt thing, and you know, in the college world, you know, Greg and I are surrounded by people who think they know what they're doing. It's hard to be graceful about that. The stuff
Let's
he's
just
talking
say
about, the John
10-year
Harbaugh,
gives,
well, the stuff he's talking about, it's scientific fact, you know, and somewhere in here, put the debate away. It's a fact. It's a law of nature. It's like gravity. You know, what happens in the air column in the tube is just factual. And when Mr. Adams says you're trying to do this and that and the other, you're trying to get the horn to be in phase with you, and it should be the other way around. You need to be in phase with that tube. And there is no debate there. And if you try to fight that, you will lose every freaking time. It's like jumping off a building and say, well, this time I'm going to hover. No, you're not. You're going to fall. So yeah, you got to play that pipe and get that thing free, and exactly what Greg says, and the breath starts to find balance, the face starts to do whatever it needs to do, all is well. Take that to the trumpet, keep it simple, and you're going to have a good day.
And just to sort of clarify, none of that is possible without blowing. None of that is possible without moving wind.
Oh no.
yeah, air. It is a wind instrument, right? It's not a
Hell
buzzing
yeah.
instrument.
Well, you know, too, another quick anecdote. I'm watching the clock too, guys, but how many times did you go see Mr. Adam with a friend? And he'd say, what have you got there, young fella? And you'd say, a trumpet. And he goes, what else could it be? Well, it's a Bach trumpet. Well, what else could it be? And you, well, it's a silver Bach trumpet. Well, could it be anything else? It's a 37 silver Bach trumpet. And he'd say, Greg, tell him what it is. And the
It's
answer,
a wind instrument.
amen, brother. You pass.
Awesome. I felt I that's kind of a kind of a question, but I think it's good to sort of go through that for the sake of everybody watching. Okay, very good. Let's see here. And remember, everybody, if you've got a question, fire it in here, because I'm running out of questions and we're running out of time. So let me just throw that out there again. Here's one, kind of changing gears a little bit. I think this is something that a lot of people won't know about Mr. Adam, but did Mr. Adam write or arrange music?
Well, he was a staff arranger for NBC for a while there in the 50s. Hey, Mike. And so he did it professionally. He had a degree from Eastman in composition, a graduate degree. And he did wickedly hip arrangements for brass choir that were just stunning, that most of which we've been able to, Bob Slack has been able to preserve. Yeah, oh my gosh, could he write? Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he has a theory degree, yes? Or did you say composition? I can't remember.
Theory composition from Eastman, yeah, at the grad level, yep.
Those are some, I just felt that was a kind of important thing to, you know, show diversification.
Incredibly talented man, yeah. And you know,
are there any famous jingles he wrote?
The "You Can Trust Your Car to the Man Who Wears a Star," the big bright Texaco star. Yeah, lots of them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I like your rendition of that. That's good.
Don't put that on Facebook.
No, that's recorded. It's I'm gonna edit that out and make it my ringtone. So okay, yeah, very good. Let's see. As we wrap things up here, let me think about how I want to.
Hey, I'll throw a quick question here for somebody on Facebook, because it follows up on the lead pipe. How specific was Mr. Adam regarding the pitch and the sound that the lead pipe made?
Thank you, Mark. I didn't catch that. Very good.
Very, very, very. So I remember a lesson I had with Mr. Adam much later. You know, keep in mind, when I started with him, he was in his 50s, younger than I am now. You know, he had black hair. He was taller than me and just vigorous. Anyway, so I went to see him some years later, and I always thought I was really playing well. You know, I had it going pretty good, and that was always entertaining when you had that attitude with Adam. So we were playing the pipe, and we played the pipe for like 20 minutes. I thought, oh, okay. I mean, really? You know, and then it dawned on me, I wasn't imitating him to the level he wanted me to imitate him. And it was only until then that we moved on. And I'm telling you, it took till I got it. So the answer is yeah. The right sound, the right delivery. There's an element of timing in how we play the pipe. There's the whole package. And it's very unlikely for him to define all the minutiae, just do it like this. And brother, it was specific in every parameter you can think of.
The pitch of the pitch of the pipe comes to mind. I know there's been some discussion on different trumpet talks about it, but the way Mr. Adam explained it to us is that the length of the tube is going to determine the pitch. And when you take a big breath and you're blowing through the pipe, you're gonna hit the middle of whatever pitch that pipe is. And so, you know, people thinking a Bach 37 is a concert E flat about, and that may be true for some, but it also depends on the student's maturity and how they're blowing. And if the air is really moving through like it should, it's going to determine the pitch of that pipe. So I just leave it there.
Yeah, great. That was from Mark.
And
I think it's from
achieving
Mark
that
Whitney.
sound, though, is going to move and change what needs to move and change.
Yeah. Here's one that I thought of. Did Mr. Adam perform, or what kind of performing did he do, or when did he do that sort of any performing?
Mr. Adam,
Go ahead, Greg.
I'm sorry, Carl.
No.
Mr. Adam felt very comfortable performing in front of his students in master classes. I never heard him perform live while I was with him. He would perform in clinics. And as far as performing outside of the studio, you know, he dedicated his entire life to teaching and making sure that his students were the pinnacle of his reason of being who he was. And so, although we never heard Mr. Adam perform, boy, it sure would have been nice to hear him back in his heyday, so to speak, with the big bands and the radio orchestras. Yeah. But I never heard him. I never heard him perform in the 70s.
And keep in mind, he taught 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
And not only was that time and energy commitment, but affected his own playing. But I also know that when he got to IU, and that school there literally were outhouses on 3rd Street, to give you an idea what Bloomington was like when he got there. And to build that studio, he would solo with high school bands and do clinics and do all the stuff young teachers do. And also in the early days at IU, when we were there were 5 full orchestras by the time it reached its pinnacle. When he got there was 1, and the faculty played in that orchestra. So he played first trumpet in that orchestra early on, you know, with students and other professionals in the other principal chairs.
Great.
And, you know, before that, you know, a lot of radio and live stuff in San Francisco and San Francisco Opera, stuff in the Denver area.
Cool. So I'm kind of thinking of a couple of questions here as we wrap things up, and I may, especially if we don't go over, I might take a mulligan on that video and see if I can get it to play correctly. I don't know why the audio went through, but the video just froze. So anyway, I might try that again. But okay, as we wrap things up here, outside of the trumpet, because we all know how influential and empowering Mr. Adam was with things that weren't related to the trumpet. What made Mr. Adam unique outside of trumpet or teaching trumpet, and you know, you can tie that into his hobbies outside of music, you know, that sort of thing. I kind of wanted to touch on what outside of trumpet, what made him special.
Go ahead, Carl.
Well, it sounds almost strange to hear, I suppose, but I was aware early on that my discipleship, my studying with Mr. Adam changed how I did everything. You know, paint a cabinet or mow the lawn, or you know, the whole work ethic thing, shunning negativity, choosing positivity, being really thoughtful about how I treated other people. Not that I ever succeeded at that. I don't mean that, but you know, it was a real global thing. And as far as his hobbies, you know, he built the house in the mountains in Colorado, and including milling the lumber for the floor. And I remember saying, why don't you, he didn't have proper windows. Why don't you just buy Anderson windows and put them in? And he said, I've done every stitch of that cabin by hand. I'm going to make, he made the windows, the cross pieces. He milled them on his shaper and he made to order windows, you know, so there was a thoroughness and a can do, to enter into anything like, well, I can't do this, I can't figure it out, wouldn't wash. You know, he harvested the timber and floated it down the river, and the kids scraped the bark off the logs. That's all true. To build that house, he fixed his cars, he fixed his tractors, he welded. This was a guy, Renaissance man. He could do everything, and that overarching attitude of there's a challenge ahead and I'm going to overcome it, and never a word of self-pity. That whole deal, positiveness, absolutely unyielding, no self-pity. I can do anything I set my mind to, all those things. Go ahead, Greg.
Now, everything is, well, I'm taking notes here. What I took away from Mr. Adam, and what I believe that what we're trying to get across to our students for generations to come, is to instill a belief system for our students to emulate. Mr. Adam had that presence of mind and fired it up in whatever he was doing, whether he was building a cabin, or I worked at his house a couple of summers while I was at school and watched him build a limestone wall and weld the lamps on top of the limestone wall. And just doing that, he would talk about, hey, let's take a big breath, young fella, and let's stay loose. You know, you can work a lot longer by staying loose, and you can't tighten it up. So, and I'm thinking to myself, what does he mean? You know, this guy's, he was in the 60s, like I am. And I'm thinking, he doesn't stop. But he made you believe by his actions of whatever he was doing that there isn't anything you can't do if your mind's in the right place. And so as a teacher, I believe that's all we're trying to do, is pay it forward so that our students believe that they can do anything they want to do. But there's a price to pay for it too. That's why modeling and getting after it and firing it up is so very important to all of us today, so that we're not hypocritical. Boy, we could get into that, but I think it's safe that we don't. So I think I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much. And you guys are doing a great job, and I sure am appreciative to be involved. Thank you.
Well, thanks for participating in this session, Greg. I appreciate it very much. My last question was we've already answered it throughout this hour and 15 minutes or whatever, but my last question was, what were the things about his life that create an enduring legacy? And that's basically what we've been talking about this whole time. And if there's anything you want to add to that, go right ahead.
Putting a finer point on it, that he walked the walk. He didn't ask anything of us that he didn't do himself.
That's right.
Just absolutely zero BS. It was just the real deal. And, so I think the benefit for us is we knew where we stood. We knew what we needed to do. We would catch ourselves when we made excuses or fell into self-pity. There was clarity there, that, not just from the spoken word, but the model he was for us.
But it kind of leaves us with what we talked about before we went live, is that, self-pity. And remember the card he pulled out? For those of you who know what I'm talking about, but for those of you who don't, when Mr. Adam thought that maybe you were just feeling a little bit too sorry for yourself, or you're getting your mind too wrapped up into you too seriously, he pulled out this little card. And the card read, "Never before have I heard such a sad story. I am deeply moved," something like that. Eric Sierveld had these printed up on cards, and he sent me a bunch. And I guess you're just going to have to look it up. But it put things into perspective in a hurry. Young fella, quit your bitching and let's fire it up.
Great. Well, I think we're pretty much, there's one. Rob, you have anything else you want to add? I think I've got this video working. I'm going to play it as we wrap it up here.
No, I was just looking through the Facebook feed.
Oh, yes.
And just looking at a few things. Here's somebody asked a good question. Say you had been studying with another teacher and then you found yourself like, oh, I like the way these guys think and the way they talk, right? So well, first off, I'll just say this, that you really need to get with somebody who to get in a room and play, okay? Because we can talk about it all day, but you got to get in a room and do some playing, because so much of what we do is communicated through the delivery of our sound, you know. But then the second question that I'll leave it up to you guys to answer is how long does it take, you know, to, because this is his question, how long does it take to sort of see improvements, progress, changes in your playing after, say, you learned this way, but now you're sort of looking to go in a different direction?
So Bob and Charlie and I are going to talk bluntly about that tomorrow at 1. Okay, so just a little sales pitch for our deal, but there is absolutely a learning curve, and you know, we'll try to flesh that out. But the double-edged sword there is, my students hear constantly about the hard work thing, you know, but we don't want it to be beating your head against the wall. The difference between work smart, work hard. You know, we want to know what we're doing too, not just, you know, impress ourselves with how many hours we put in. But on the other hand, if you think you're going to transform your thinking and your breathing and whatever else has to happen with how you play the trumpet, you think you're going to do that by hearing a seminar, you're delusional. There's a well-known Doc Severinsen podcast where he walks out, and he was, I'm guessing maybe in his 70s at the time. I don't really know, but he walks out and stands behind the lectern and says, "Go practice," and then he walked off. And you know, of course, he came back. But yeah, none of this is going to happen without patient, diligent application. And it can be a slow process, but you got to invest in yourself to get there for sure.
Well said.
Great. I think we should wrap things up, unless anybody's got anything else pertinent.
Well done, guys.
Good job.
I think I got the video working. I'm gonna try to play that again, and just real quick, looking ahead at, I'm sorry?
Squirt some valve oil on it.
Yeah, I'll pour some valve oil. That'd be good.
What time is the next session?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. It's the play to win at 1 o'clock Central, which would be in about an hour and a half from now. So everybody enjoy a sandwich or whatever.
Wayne Dixon's got a really valuable look at how to succeed in what it is we do.
Good.
Great. And a quick shout out. I want to shout out to Mark Woodring, who was viewing. He edited all the videos you will see this week from Altus. He's a good friend for us, and he's just a killer player in Memphis, and has really also gotten into the art of video and outstanding audio capture. So just sort of want to give a plug for our friend Mark Woodring in Memphis. Another Kentucky guy. A lot of
Isn't that some?
I know the trumpet heritage in Kentucky is so strong.
Of course it is.
But I will say, as an Ohioan, I mean, it's not too bad coming out of Ohio either. You know, it's pretty strong.
Well, thanks everybody. I'll send us out with Altus playing Gilded Fanfare by James Stevenson.
Good. Bye, guys.
All right, thanks.